Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's
Erev
today's
Rosh Hashanah.
date. Anybody know today's date? Erev Rosh Hashanah, December 31st. It's the second day of Parsha Shemos. First of all, before I start the shiur, on a very, very personal note, I want to once again apologize to Liz. I spilled coffee in her store yesterday.
Oh, please. Oh.
And it's been bothering me.
You're indebted to her now.
I'm indebted
So now you're my
for life.
servant.
So I want to once again apologize.
No need.
And I learned, by the way, I learned this lesson from your husband. Your husband thought he did an injustice to me, and he told me he's going to have to apologize to me 20 times, and he probably did.
Yes.
So I'm going to be doing the same
No,
thing.
please don't.
You're going to have to get
No.
69
I
lashes.
apologize actually 21 times.
21
You did
times.
the number and then you do
You
one.
plus one. We
So
learned
70 lashes.
70,
69
six-
lashes.
69.
Round it up.
Which restaurant?
Okay.
Let's move on.
It was. I'm going to get to it. I defiled their holy place, Bobby's restaurant. So I decided that the shiur today will be on that subject matter, and I actually made that decision about 20 minutes ago. I was going to talk about the parsha, so somehow I'm going to have to get the parsha into this, and I found an unbelievable connection. My current wife, Lynn, suggested that I go back to doing halachos. When we did Mishnah Berurah. I'm sorry, Benny, I'm not going to be looking at you most of the time. I'm facing this way. No, you're beautiful as well. So, Benny, we had a meal Friday night, and even though it's the secular year, I said something very interesting, that in last week's Parsha, when Jacob gives the blessings to all his children, if you take a look at the first letter of each of the sons' blessing, you'd count up the value, the gematria of the first letter of each of the blessings comes to 365, which is the number of days in the solar year.
Interesting.
If you take the last letter of each of the blessing, comes to 354, which is exactly the lunar year, the Jewish calendar. It's just amazing. It's something. It's like unbelievable. So there's certainly something to be said about today being the last day of the solar or secular year. So as I
But did it start today, that year, or they don't know?
well, but nevertheless,
They say according to,
we have a concept of dina malchus adina, that we go according to the rule of the land, the laws of the country, and since the whole world recognizes today being the last day of the year, so it has to have some application to us as well. Now, this week's parsha is Shemos, and just a little tidbit, nothing to do with what I want to talk about. There's something so unique about every letter in the Torah. We always say that. So you take a look at the first 5 letters of this week's parsha, Ve'ela Shemos B'nai Yisrael Haboy Mitzrayim. These are the names of the people that came to Mitzrayim. If you take a look at the first 5 words, Ve'ela Shemos B'nai Yisrael Haboyim. You look at the last letter, is, who can tell me what it? You got a hey. Ve'ela is a hey. Shemos is a tav. B'nai is a yud. Yisrael is a lamed. Haboim is a mem. So it's tav, hey, yud, lamed, mem.
Hey.
Tilim.
They start with hey.
What? No, but you rearrange.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, okay. They don't want to make it too easy for you. Okay, so here we see, when we talked about that also, that the Torah, when it was given together with the oral and the written law, were given both at the same time. And here is a direct allusion to Tilim. Tilim is David HaMelech.
What does it mean?
It means to praise.
Tehillah,
to praise.
Like
Yes.
the song. The
Yeah,
song.
It really stands for Tehillah with the mem, for Mendy. That's what it means.
Prize Mendy.
Cute, Mendy, cute.
That was very cute, yeah.
There's the word.
Yeah. My wife insists that I use the word cute
I figured
every
you
time.
were
I think it's very cute of her to make me do that, and I accommodate her for that. Oh, no, I had it. No. Okay. Morning. Okay. So, in this week's Parsha, it talks about, I'm sitting, where's my coffee? Is that my coffee?
That's yours. Yeah.
Okay. So, am I allowed to drink this coffee in shul? Are we allowed to have coffee in shul right now? It's not so simple. And we're gonna discuss it now. See if I can read my own notes, which I just scribbled. Okay. Everybody's familiar with the story that Moshe Rabbeinu, was walking and he saw the bush burning. And what was happening to the bush?
No harm.
It wasn't being consumed. So he goes, wow, this must be an unbelievable place. This must be a very holy place.
Take off my shoes.
And what did God tell him? Good morning, Alan. What did God tell him? Shal nalechem al raglecha. Take your shoes off from your feet, because this place is very holy. So, in fact, the Rambam says that any place that's holy, you can't have your shoes on. And that is why this gentleman to my left will tell you that when he goes up to do Birchas Kahanim, he takes his shoes off. Why do you take your shoes off?
Not only that, we in Iran, the Sephardim, when they go to shul, they have a section that you put
right.
shoes.
So realistically, whenever we go into a shul or any other holy place, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, when the temple was standing, all the Kahanim, they served, they did all the work and all the sacrificing and all the other related exercises they did over there. It was all done without shoes. Because now, and if we get to it, I'll explain to you what's the concept of shoe and why you take off the shoes. Like maybe you should take off your shirt, maybe you should take off your watch. What's the business of taking off the shoes? So the Rambam says that any good morning, Sydney. The Rambam says that any place you go, you should take off shoes, because the Rambam holds, there's 613 mitzvahs, and it's not universally accepted what are the 613 mitzvahs. There are probably about 600 of them everybody agrees, but there are a few, maybe 10 of them, which some say are part of the 600, and some people have different ones for a few. And one of the ones the Rambam includes in the 613, not necessarily everybody agrees, but one of the ones that he agrees, he says that belongs to the 613, is to have a fear of the Beis Hamikdash, to have fear, to be in awe, to have reverence for the Beis Hamikdash, for the holy temple. And therefore he says that you could not come to the Beis Hamikdash with anything which is sort of disrespectful. And he said you can't bring your staff. In those times, people used to go around with a stick or a cane, whatever. You can't bring that. Lynn probably has a list there of other things that you can't bring. What is it? Sweet and sour duck sauce. You can't bring your money belt. In that time, people were going with a money belt. You couldn't bring that. And he says you can't wear your shoes. So we see from the Rambam that wearing shoes is something which is disrespectful. Now, I would think that taking off your shoes and walking around barefoot is disrespectful.
You're connected to it by the flesh of your feet.
Okay, so Liz is saying that if you're not wearing shoes, that you're connected to the ground, and since I never thought of that, but that's a very good thing, that take off your shoes because the place, God told Moshe, take off your shoes because the ground that you're standing on is holy, and therefore you should be connected to it. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. The other way you can ask a question, if it's holy, you shouldn't be touching it. Because, so maybe you should wear something to separate yourself. So there are two ways to look at it. Now the Gemara says, I believe in Sanhedrin, that nowadays what's considered the Beis HaMikdash? The shul. The shul is called a Mikdash Ma'at. Ma'at, which means small. It's a miniature, a Ma'at. Ma'at means a minimized version. A minimized version. Katan, yeah. Okay, so there's actually a machlokas, an argument between the Rishonim, and explain to you what the Rishonim is, the first set of commentaries, whether this is a biblical commandment that you have to fear for the Beis HaMikdash, or is it rabbinical? And some say biblical and some say rabbinical, but nevertheless, it's certainly a rabbinical commandment that we have to have fear for the Beis HaMikdash, and nowadays that would apply to the shul we're sitting in. So if that's the case, we may have some problems. Let's look at what the Mishnah Berurah says. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah has the first part, as I said many times, is the Mechaber, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and then the commentary on it is what we call Mishnah Berurah, which was written by who? Go back, listen to your tapes, and Lynn, tell everybody who was written by.
Oh no, don't put me on the spot.
Oh, you don't know? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Berurah. The Chofetz Chaim is famous for what? What is the most famous?
Lashon Hara.
Lashon Hara. And we take it from what we daven every single day. Mio isha Chofetz Chaim netzor lashon chamara. Who is the man that wants life? Who wants to live long? What way is to guarantee that you're going to live long? Is to not to say Lashon Hara. As I told everybody many times, this is very important to me. I don't say Lashon Hara, and I'm going to give you the list of the people who do. Joe O'Sullivan. Anyway. So the Chofetz Chaim is the commentary, the main commentary, and nowadays 99.9% of the halachas that we do nowadays, we rely on his final judgment, on his final psak. I don't know how to say psak in English. Okay. Anyway, so let's look at the Mechaber. Let's look at rules, on his final rules, the final adjudication. Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. It says, Botei Knesuyos, Botei Midrashos, houses of worship and houses of learning. Once upon a time, there were separate places where you went to daven and separate places where you went to learn. One was called the Beit HaKnesset, a place of gathering, and that was for davening. And then there was Beis Medrash, a place where we learned. Today, it's all in one. And there are many, many, many different sets of laws that apply to houses of learning and houses of praying. But today, it's all mixed up, and basically, we combine the rules, and sometimes it's problematic, as in the case of me drinking the cup of coffee, which hopefully we'll get to. So it says over here that the houses of worship and the houses of medicine, ein nahagen behen kalas rosh. You cannot conduct yourself in shul with kalas rosh. Kalas rosh means, literally it means lightheadedness, but what it means is frivolity. You can't do anything of a frivolous nature in shul. Morning. And it gives example. Kegon, for example, schok, you can't joke around.
We're in trouble.
Sicha betela, mundane talking, speaking, small talk, how's the weather? According to this, you can't ask somebody how's the weather. You can't ask somebody how did you sleep last night. Okay, you can't ask somebody what time is Bubby's opening. You can't ask those questions. Then there's something else. It says, Ve'ein ochlim v'shosim behem. And you cannot eat and drink in them. Now, there is a dispute whether it should say the with a vav, and you can't eat and drink in them, or is eating and drinking an example of frivolous activities. Again, the Mechaber says you can't do anything frivolous, you can't talk, you can't joke around. Is it and you can't eat and drink, or is eating and drinking also part of the frivolous? Or is eating and drinking not frivolous, but nevertheless we can't do that either? So right away we see that it may make a difference. At a time when we are allowed to do something, if it's not frivolous, can we eat and drink? If it's an example of a frivolous nature, if there's no vav over there, and eating and drinking is a frivolous thing, so if you're in a place where you're allowed to do something which is not frivolous, then you would be allowed to eat and drink. But if we say that it's and eating and drinking, that you can do frivolous and also you can do eating and drinking, that would mean that under no circumstances can you eat and drink, even if it's not considered frivolous. So hopefully we'll come to a resolution to that in a few minutes.
This is a Beit Midrash too here.
Okay, so like I said, this is a Beis Medrash also.
Beit Midrash you're allowed to, right?
Yeah, so let's for a moment go with the opinion that eating and drinking is a frivolous thing. So certainly we would not be allowed to have a cup of coffee right now in shul. Now, why would you consider eating and drinking a frivolous thing? So that means, because generally you should not be allowed to do anything frivolous, even if you're not in Beis Medrash. You shouldn't be allowed to, in general, do things. Anything you can't do in public, you shouldn't do in private, so to speak. So the answer is that eating and drinking, maybe it is a frivolous thing, but there's certain frivolous things, certain mundane things, certain physical pleasure things you can do at home, but in the shul we have a higher standard. So although there are many things that we're allowed to do at home, but you can't do it in shul. So nevertheless, how am I allowed to drink a cup of coffee in shul? Yes?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can't start their day
Without a cup of
and
coffee.
can walk in lightheaded already without having the little thing of sugar,
Right.
without having a little bit of coffee.
Right.
So it could be, this gets me going.
Okay. So very good. And that's pretty much part of the answer we're going to give. Now how are we allowed to have a kiddush in shul? We have a kiddush here in shul every Shabbos.
Somebody pays for it.
Why are we allowed to make kiddush in shul? We have a concept of ein kiddush ela b'makom suda. Lynn, what does that mean?
There's nothing.
You're not allowed to make kiddush if you don't have a meal.
Bread.
Well, some people say you can have a piece of cake. So that's why whenever somebody gives a kiddush in shul, let's say somebody has yahrzeit, and you give kiddush, he'll always give a little schnapps and some cookies or cake. Because you can't make kiddush unless you have a suda. That's the thing. So how are you allowed to make kiddush in shul? Because when you make kiddush, you have to have a suda. And how are you allowed to have a suda? A suda means a meal. How are you allowed to have a meal in shul? It's certainly something which the halacha says clearly that you can't eat in shul.
If you're combining the synagogue to Bet Knesset to Beit Midrash, and Beit Midrash usually people learn, people eat, people do. So maybe we do combine them together. Maybe because of that you could say you are allowed to.
Okay, but it actually says, as I read in the beginning, that Botei Kinesios, the shuls, Botei Midrashes, and the houses of learning, these are the laws, that you can't eat in it. So it's both. So whether this is considered a shul or whether this is considered a house of learning, the halacha still says clearly that you can't eat in there.
Unless you have a separate room, maybe?
Excuse me?
All the yeshivot, they have dining room.
Okay,
maybe.
so...
Is there something to having a place that's separate?
Okay, so you're all touching on the answer. So the answer that Tosfos gives, he tries to give two answers. The first answer he gives, that the reason you're allowed to make kiddush in shul, because there are people, either guests or here from out of town, they don't have anywhere to go to eat, or poor people, this is what they're relying on. So it becomes sort of like a mitzvah, and he's trying to say that a sudas mitzvah you're allowed to have in a shul. A sudas mitzvah would be something like if let's say if you had a bris, so it's a sudas mitzvah. So you can wash there and you can have. So he's trying to answer that. So the problem with that answer is that so then the guests and the poor people could eat. So how are we allowed to eat? Regular people who are going to go home and have their meal, their Shabbos meal, they're going to have at home. How are they allowed to have here?
Embarrass the people that don't have a place to eat.
Well, you know what? I rarely see people being embarrassed to eat. You know?
I'm not embarrassed.
Okay. The other answer that Tosfos gives, that there's a Gemara in Megillah. The Gemara in Masechtas Megillah says that in the diaspora, when they built a shul, they built it under this condition, that it should be allowed to be used for non-shul business, under that condition. So he tries to say that that's the reason we're allowed to do it, because when we originally built the shul, there's a lot of things in our laws that if we make a condition ahead of time, there's leeway. So according to that, he says that you would be allowed to eat. The problem with that is that if you look closely at that Gemara, it says specifically that those conditions that applies only after the shul becomes defunct. Because there were many times that shuls were destroyed or they closed up a shul. So that condition that you're allowed to use the shul for non-shul reasons only applies when the shul is not functioning anymore. But when the shul is functioning, you can't do anything mundane in it. So we're still left with the original question on how we're allowed to eat. So we're really running short of time, so I'm just going to and the answer, the bottom line is that he also tries to answer that they always had a side room where they would eat, but we know, no, we have shalosh shudas in shul. A lot of shuls have it right there where they daven. So the bottom line is, he says that anything that helps out the shul and it's a function of the shul, you're allowed to do because that's part of the shul. It's not so much that it's a sudas mitzvah, because it's a debate whether eating on Shabbos is considered a sudas mitzvah. Most people say it's not. So that would not be the answer. The answer is that it's part of the shul, and therefore it's part of the function of the shul and enhances the shul, and that's why we're allowed to have it. And he goes so far that the halacha brings down, what about giving kids and candy? And this is dear to my heart. What about giving kids candy in shul? Why are they allowed to walk around and eat Hershey bars? So the answer is because that enhances the shul. Now I just want to take another minute or two, getting back to the shoes. Why is taking off the shoes something that we do? So we know we have four things. There are four concepts of things in the world. There is inanimate object, there's animate object, there is life, and there's man. Inanimate object would be this cup. Animate objects would be a plant, something that grows. There's life like a cow, and there's man, which is the fourth one, which overrides anything. And the Marshal, one of the holiest of commentaries, says that that man is ruler over all those things, and everything that God made for us was made for our benefit, and that's why we're allowed to wear fur coats and everything, because the animal was put into this planet for us. And what signifies that we are the ruler? When we wear shoes. So when we make a bracha, we're going to make in a minute, we go in the brachas in the beginning, one of them is She'asali Kol Tzarki, that you made for me everything that I need. When you make that bracha, that's when you have to have in mind the shoes. Because the shoes is made of animals, we step on plant life, it symbolizes that we are the ruler and we are above everything else. And because of that, when we walk into a house of God, that's when we know we have to submit to Him and take off our shoes, that we're not the ruler.
So we should be taking off our shoes.
Okay.
So we walk in
Have a good day. Thank you.